Civilization by Clive Bell. Chapter 1. Introduction. Since from August 1914 to November 1918, Great Britain and her allies were fighting for civilization, it cannot, I suppose, be impertinent to inquire what precisely civilization may be. Liberty and justice have always been reckoned expensive words, but that civilization could cost as much as, I forget how many millions a day, came as a surprise to many thoughtful taxpayers. The story of this word's rise to the highest place amongst British war aims is so curious that, even were it less relevant, I should be tempted to tell it, and in fact only by telling can I explain how this essay took final shape. "You are fighting for civilization," cried the wisest and best of those leaders who led us into war, and the very soldiers took up the cry, "Join up, for civilization's sake." Startled by this sudden enthusiasm for an abstraction in which, till then, politicians and recruiting sergeants had manifested little or no interest, I, in my turn, began to cry, "And what is civilization?" I did not cry aloud, be sure, at that time, for crying things of that sort aloud, one was sent to prison. But now that it is no longer criminal, nor unpatriotic even, to ask questions, I intend to inquire what this thing is, for which we fought, and for which we pay. I propose to investigate the nature of our leading war aim, whether my search will end in discovery, and, if it does, whether what is discovered will bear any likeness to the Treaty of Versailles remains to be seen. If I remember right, England entered the war because Germany had violated a treaty, it being held that a European war was preferable to an unavenged injustice. Fiat justitia ruet caelum. Let justice be done, though it bring the house down. The unqualified acceptance of this formidable doctrine may well have aroused in reflective minds a sense of insecurity, which sense may have induced those publicists and politicians who had to justify to chapel-goers and liberal newspaper readers our declaration of war to back the moral with a religious motive. Whatever the cause, that was what happened. Someone, possibly Mr. Lloyd George himself, more probably Mr. Horatio Bottomley, struck out the daring figure, the Cross versus Krupps, and as from the first the newspapers had welcomed the war as Armageddon, it stood to reason that Kaiser Wilhelm II was Antichrist. Positively, there was something neuronic about him, an alleged taste for music, maybe. Besides, there were prophecies, signs, and portents in the sky, and the angels pullulating at Mons, all which tended to prove that God was for us, and very likely that we were against the devil. And yet, remembering His Imperial Majesty's engaging habit of pressing into the hands of young ladies a little book called Talks with Jesus, some of us found the identification unconvincing. Was it quite courteous either to insist on the dogmatic issue when the French Republic was officially agnostic and the Mikado of the Shinto persuasion? And was it prudent to involve the God of the Christians too deeply in a quarrel where French infidels, Japanese miscreants, Muslims and Parsis from India, and cannibals from Senegal were banded against that pillar of the Catholic Church, the late Emperor of Austria? So, just when we were beginning to wonder whether the war could be exactly described as a crusade, some cautious and cultivated person, a writer in the Times literary supplement, I surmise, discovered that what the Allies were really up against was Nietzsche. That discovery was at first a great success. Nietzsche was a butt for the high, outrageous mettle of every one of us. That he was a German and a poet sufficed to put him wrong with the ruling class. And since he was said to have despised mediocrity, the middle and lower had some grounds for disliking him. Down with Nietzsche! Ah, that was fun, drubbing the nasty blackguard, the man who presumed to sneer at liberals without admiring liberal unionists. He was an epileptic, it seemed, a scrofulous fellow, and no gentleman. We told the working men about him. We told them about his being the prophet of German imperialism, the poet of Prussia, and the lick-spittle of the Junkers, and were anyone who had compromised himself by dabbling in German literature so unpatriotic as to call our scholarship into question, we called him a traitor and shut him up. Those were the days, the best of 1914, when France and England were defending Paris against Nietzsche and the Russian steamroller was catching him in the back. And yet, this holding of the fort against Nietzsche was not wholly satisfying either, For one thing, it seemed depressing to be on the defensive everywhere. For another, Nietzsche was so difficult to pronounce. And besides, it seemed odd to be fighting against someone of whose existence 6 months earlier not 1 in 10,000 had heard. We wanted not merely to be fighting against things, something we wanted to be fighting for. For what? Belgium seemed too small, not to say grubby. Christianity, indiscreet. The balance of power, old-fashioned. Ourselves, improbable. We longed for a resonant, elevating, and yet familiar objective, something which Christians and agnostics, liberals, conservatives, and socialists, those who had always liked war and those who unprincipled detested it, those who doted on Marie Corelli, and those who thought better of Mr. Wells, those who loved whiskey, and those who preferred Lady Astor, those, in a word, who took their opinions from the Daily News, and those who took them from the Daily Express, could all feel proud and pleased to make other people die for. And then it was that, to some more comprehensive mind, to someone enjoying a sense of history and his own importance, to the Prime Minister or Professor Gilbert Murray, I dare say, came the fine and final revelation that what we were fighting for was civilization. And then to me, this urgent query, and what is this civilization for which we fight? An exact definition I do not hope to give. Already I have outgrown that glorious certainty which enabled me in 60,000 words to tell the world precisely what was art. Yet, as a British general might have stuck the butt end of his cane into a map of France, observing bluffly, "Your objective must be somewhere hereabouts," so I, perhaps, can make a smudge on the chart of general ideas and say, civilization lies about there. To begin with what is dull and obvious, it seems reasonable to suppose that civilization is good. Were it not, we should hardly have been expected to pay so much for it. And if good, it must be good either as an end or as a means. Now, unless when we speak of a highly civilized society, we mean the ideal or absolute perfection or heaven, civilization is not the end. And the fact that we do commonly speak of the defects and vices of civilization seems to show that, to most of us, it is no more than a means. Heaven transcends civility, and a society might be perfectly civilized and yet fall short of the ideal. From which it follows that what I am going to describe, or attempt to describe, is not absolute good, but a particular means to good. To estimate its value will be my business later. For the present, we need agree only that, since civilization is good, and since good states of mind are generally allowed alone to be good as ends, civilization is presumably a means to good states of mind, which is, of course, another reason for rejoicing that those who were fighting for it were those who won the war. To say that civilization is a means to good is not, be it noted, the same as saying that it is the only means. This I feel bound to mention because of late the opinion has gained ground that unless a means to good be the sole means, it is not a means at all. It is thus that science has fallen into disfavor with a school of thinkers, or perhaps I should say writers, for no better reason than that, in the opinion of these, and indeed of most people, a world in which there was nothing but science would be deficient in passion and beauty. The notion that passion and beauty and science may all be good is, I know not why, abhorrent to the romantic neo-mumbo-jumbo mind, both here and abroad. Certainly, civilization is not the only means to good. Life, since it is a necessary means to states of mind of any sort, is a means to good. Sun and rain, because they are means to life, are means to good also. Certainly, life, sun, and rain are also means to civilization, since without them civilization could not come into being. But they are not the same as civilization. Neither are they means to good only insofar as they are means to civilization. In fact, life, sun, rain, bread, wine, beauty, science, and civilization are all means to good. And the thing to bear in mind is that while beauty is a direct means to good, and civilization a mediate, sun, rain, and life are remote, though essential means. I should not have wasted ink and paper on this proposition had I not foreseen that it would lead to another, identical as it happens, yet by the very people who have accepted it in its first and more obvious form sometimes overlooked, especially when they are urging us to do this or that in the interests of civilization. Not being the only means to good, civilization cannot be any means to good. Of course, if civilization were the only means to good, it would follow that anything which made for good was a part of civilization. But as civilization is not, it behooves us to pick and choose correctly. In suitable hands and at the right moment, gin and the Bible are means to good, undoubtedly. Yet it is a question how far European traders and missionaries are justified in calling what they carry into savage countries civilization. Irrational and uncompromising belief, blind patriotism and loyalty have often been means to sublime states of mind. Too good, therefore. But they are not civilization, and to civilization more often than not have proved inimical. Civilization is a particular means to good, and we must be careful not to assume that anything we like or respect is a part of it. We must not assume that it contains all our favorite virtues. We may vastly prefer eating a slice of roast mutton to studying metaphysics, yet it would be rash on that account only to take it for granted that the first was the more civilized of these two admirable occupations. Civilization, which is not the only means to good, which is not any means to good, is a particular means, which, on the authority of Allied statesmen and on grounds in my opinion more solid, we may take to be immensely important. Even so, we are far from discovering what it is. The past participle civilized, Latin adjective civilis, as those who devoted their best years to the study of these things have the advantage of knowing, is correctly as well as commonly predicated of a state or society, civitas. Till the middle of the 18th century, a Frenchman for civilisé would have written police, and polis, you know, means city. When we speak of a civilized age, we mean that the society which flourished in that age was civilized. Most commonly and more correctly, civilization or civility is attributed to an organized agglomeration of human beings. Less commonly, and rather less correctly, it is predicated of persons, citizens, cives. But even a mind unsharpened on the whetstone of gerunds and verbs in me will guess that in fact civilization must be the product of civilized individuals, and that any attempt to understand the nature of the thing or account for its existence leads inevitably and directly to human beings who create and maintain it. Further, unaided common sense will tell us that about individuals we have a chance of making statements more profitable and more probable far than any we can hope to make about an entity so vague and multifarious as a state or society. There is some getting at a man. You can say something fairly definite about the desires and idiosyncrasies of John Smith or Wei Sing, but what for certain can be said about those of Great Britain or China? When we talk of China's honor or England's interests, it is impossible we should mean anything precise, and unlikely that we mean anything at all. Not all the inhabitants of the British Isles have the same interests, neither have all Chinamen the same feelings. But we might be able to name with confidence the ruling passion of a particular Chinaman and trace with assurance a line of conduct that would be favorable to Smith. Had England refrained from declaring war on Germany, England, as everyone knows, could never again have held up her head. But I dare say Smith would have kept his nose in the air. This being so, you might expect me to begin my inquiry into the nature of civilization by attempting to discover what constitutes a civilized man. That would be the logical order. I am debarred from following it by a fact. The fact is that whereas it is pretty generally agreed that certain societies have been civilized, and even highly civilized, there is no such consensus of opinion about persons. My grand object being to discover what civilization is, my first endeavor should be to discover characteristics peculiar to admittedly civilized entities. If before examining the entity, civilized individual, I examine the civilized society, that will be because of the latter we have universally recognized types. I shall begin with neither. I shall begin with entities universally recognized, uncivilized, for by doing justice to the characteristics of these, I ought to arrive at certain negative conclusions of fundamental importance. I shall know what civilization is not. No characteristic of a barbarous society can possibly be a peculiarity of civilized societies. It cannot be one of those distinguishing characteristics, of those characteristics for which I am looking, which differentiates civility from barbarism. It cannot be of the essence of civility. Not until I have discovered what civilization is not, shall I attempt, by seeking its essence in universally accepted types, to discover what it is. When in those types I have found, if I can find, common characteristics, not to be found in barbarous societies, I shall have done the first part of my job. I shall have discovered the distinguishing characteristics of civilization. I am going to elaborate a theory. That theory, if I am to take my readers with me, must be based on assumptions which seem to them fair. I must, that is to say, deduce the peculiar characteristics of civilization from a consideration of entities admittedly civilized and admittedly uncivilized. Now, as I have said, the only entities about the civility or barbarism of which there is a real consensus of opinion are societies. Wherefore it is to societies, and not to individuals, that I must look for my distinguishing characteristics. These found, I can go on to consider their source, which can be only in the minds of men and women. A group of these, as we shall see, is the veritable fountain, and if we are to push our speculations so far as to inquire whether by cultivating the cause one might hope to magnify the effect, whether in fact one might increase civilization, inevitably we shall find ourselves wondering by what means might be produced and maintained great numbers of highly civilized people. But for the present I must go to societies for my characteristics, for amongst societies alone are to be found specimens unanimously voted savage, and others generally reckoned civilized. 2 or 3, at any rate, there are, the high civility of which is not contested by any reasonably well-educated person. These shall be my paragons. To those other 3 or 4, which often are, or have been reckoned highly civilized, but of which the claims to that title are seriously and on solid grounds disputed, I will not go. Just as there are admittedly civilized societies, there are societies which all the world agrees to call barbarous. These you may admire. You may like them, or think you like them, better than you like civilized societies. But by consent, so common are they reckoned savage that anthropologists go to them for some indication of the state of primitive man during those centuries or millenniums when he was ceasing to be a brute, or at any rate passing from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic stage. These admirable anthropologists have made minute studies of the manners and beliefs of the most barbarous of these barbarous peoples, and it is from their studies that I hope to learn at least what civilization is not. Remember, no characteristic, no matter how honorable, can, if possessed by savage communities, possibly be a distinguishing characteristic of civility. Civilized societies may share such characteristics, of course. They may possess them either as attributes common to humanity or as relics of barbarism. Also, these characteristics may be valuable and attractive, and far from being peculiar to savages may be possessed by many or most highly civilized people. But because they are not peculiar to civilized societies, they will not help us to a definition. Though certain characteristics shared with savages were common to all civilized societies, they would not be distinctive, and distinctive characteristics, peculiarities, are what we are looking for. We want characteristics which are common to all highly civilized societies and which savages are without. Only by disentangling these can we hope to learn what civilization is. My first business, then, will be to clear the ground. I must eliminate those characteristics that might possibly be taken for tokens of civility were they not shared with the lowest and most undeveloped of savage tribes. To this end I must write a learned chapter, at the foot of whose pages some readers, justly suspicious of my erudition, will look for a forest of notes. They will be disappointed. In so slight and superficial an essay, copious footnotes would be out of place. A few there must be, but a few only. For the mass of information in my next chapter, I have gone to that classic work, Westermarck's Origin and Development of the Moral Ideas. Here the suspicious reader will find warrant for every fact deduced, and here he will find, what is more, a masterly account of the faith and morals of savage peoples, based on monumental learning, supported by innumerable references and illustrated by fascinating anecdotes. As for footnotes, my objection to them in light literature is, partly, that they distract the eye, partly that too often they are a device for shirking the detestable labor of working hard lumps of raw matter into form. If the habit of reprinting articles is to be suffered, these long, adcititious footnotes must be suffered too. To journalism, claiming immortality, they are the inevitable complement. But in a light essay which purports to have been conceived as a whole from the first word to the last, they are generally a sign of weakness, and hardly to be tolerated. It is not that I dislike a show of erudition. On the contrary, I am as conscious as another of the considerable dignity conferred on the page by a judicious citation or an imposing name. Also, the hopeful convert to my views shall not fail to be comforted and confirmed in his faith by meeting, in the text, with some fine ones, but only when I have to make one of those statements that jerk from an unfriendly reader the ejaculation, "Liar!" shall I be at pains, by means of an asterisk, to guide the insult home. Just now I tried to please this sort of reader by calling my essay slight and superficial. Slight in every sense, assuredly it will be. Probably in the same way it will be superficial. But when I used the word, I was thinking chiefly of its most modern connotation. I meant that I was going to try to be intelligible. I sympathize with those writers who have been obliged by poverty or the exigences of military service to dispense with education, and I quite understand why they discountenance those whose object it has been to express ideas as simply, clearly, and briefly as possible. Such desperate methods would reduce the longest books of many of our best prophets to a very few pages, for when there is no butter to spread, you cannot even spread it thin. In such dearth, the only thing to do is to dig mysteriously into the loaf, which in literature is called being profound. And though there are readers who, having gone down to the bottom of the pit, and there failed to discover the smallest speck of margarine, will venture to call such profundities empty, in the brisker parts of Europe and America the profound style is generally held in honor. In me, however, the airs of a mole or a miner would be mere affectation. Besides, unlike modern poetry and philosophy and philosophic fiction, an essay of this sort cannot hope to appeal to that great public which, in quest of life, brushes aside all hair-splitting distinctions between sense and nonsense. I dare not be profound, and frankly this essay would have been written with all the shallow lucidity of Montesquieu, Hume, or Voltaire, had the essayist known the secret of their superficiality. Because I wish to be understood, I shall try to be intelligible. For the same reason I shall repeat myself. Long ago, I might have learnt from the hoardings that to say the same thing over and over again is the way to convince. But when I was younger, being rather silly about my fellow creatures, I used to believe that to convey to them one's meaning, one had only to state it clearly, and once. There was someone in Messrs. Chatto and Windus's publishing house as green as I, who, after reading the manuscript of my first book, Art, hinted with great delicacy that, on one point, the definition of a work of art, I had perhaps insisted excessively. So I had. As a private and exceptional human being, the reader was perfectly right, but as a publisher he was wrong. For the public I had not been repetitious enough, and to this day able critics in England and America continue to assert that by a work of art I mean precisely what I said so often I did not mean. Well, I have learnt my lesson. Wherefore, anyone who may notice that in this essay I say the same thing several times over will be so kind, I hope, as to attribute the author's tediousness to a peculiarity of readers in general, a peculiarity, I need hardly say, not shared by the particular lady or gentleman who happens to be reading these words.